It all started so innocently. My wife and I went shopping on Michigan Avenue. Jane was looking for a new outfit for our upcoming 25th anniversary. She found a nice dress and 2 pairs of shoes to go with it, but couldn't decide which pair to get. So I suggested we stop at Gibson's for a drink and ask our sister-in-law's opinion. Jane agreed. After 2 hours of shopping, she was ready for a drink, and it would be a pleasant surprise for Taylor since we hadn't seen her for quite some time. We assumed that Taylor, our sister-in-law, would be working today since she usually tried to take a shift on Saturday, saying that tips were always better on Saturday. Our son Paul was on a business trip last week, collecting evidence and information on a case he was working on. Paul works in the district attorney's office, and, although he was not allowed to go into detail, he hinted that the case was connected to the Russian mafia, and he had spoken with several former members under federal witness protection. Jane and I caught a taxi for the short ride. It was only 6 blocks, but Jane's legs were already giving out. Jane just has to wear 4-inch heels when she goes shopping on Michigan Avenue. It kind of fits the bill. I've been married long enough to know that it's best to keep my opinions to myself and not point out the illogical nature of her shoe choice. The taxi stopped us at the restaurant. It was midday, so this should have been the quietest time of Taylor's shift. With a little luck, we can chat for a few minutes while enjoying cocktails and appetizers. When I opened the restaurant door for Jane, I immediately noticed Taylor at the back of the bar. She was hard to miss, as she was a true Scandinavian beauty, 5 feet 9 inches tall. Taylor was talking to another of the waiters, but there was an intimacy in their posture that made me wary, including the fact that Taylor's hand was resting on the waiter's arm. When we walked in, the doorman wasn't there, so we stood there for a full minute. During that minute, I didn't take my eyes off Taylor. I was a little surprised by the way they looked at each other. I looked at Jane to see if she felt the same way. I asked the doorman for a table in Taylor's section, and after we were seated, Taylor finally looked away from the other waiter. When she first walked over to our table, she put on her waitress smile, which disappeared the moment she recognized us, and was replaced with an expression of shock and concern. "Mom, Dad, what a surprise!" Taylor's voice was a little tense, and she was clearly trying to put a smile back on her face. Jane told her, "Taylor, we just stopped by for a drink and to ask your opinion on some shoes. We've been shopping for hours and we both need a drink." "Regular? Basil Hayden on the blocks for you, Dad, and Grey Goose on the blocks for you, Mom?" "That would be great. Plus, one of those cheese plates, please." "Take your time, Taylor. How have you been this week without Paul?" I asked. "Very busy and very lonely. Paul is really missed, and I hope he comes home soon. Work has been normal. I'm training Carlo, the new waiter." Taylor looked at Carlo as she said this, and much to her disappointment, Carlo winked when he saw her watching. Taylor rushed off, saying, "I'll get the drinks," and most likely told Carlo to cool it in front of her relatives. Carlo took a quick glance at us and headed to the kitchen. I used Taylor's absence to ask Jane, "Baby, based on my past, I know I'm a little suspicious, so tell me what you saw there." "Mark, you don't have suspicions without reason. I saw the same thing as you, and I won't let Taylor break our son's heart. She's too nervous and looks too comfortable with the new guy." "Do you think I should call your Uncle Teddy?" Teddy was Jane's uncle who had retired from the Chicago PD several years ago and worked in security. Jane's entire family, on her father's side, the Summers, were police officers, and on her mother's side, Simoncelli, were involved with the Sicilian mafia. This made for interesting family gatherings. "Yeah, why not call my uncle and ask him to participate?" Taylor returned with our drinks and sat with us for a while since there were only a few other customers. When Carlo came to the table to bring our appetizer, I took the opportunity to introduce myself and chat with him for a bit. It was obvious that Carlo's first language was not English. It took me a couple of questions before I knew he was from Italy, worked here while attending Loyola. Jane and I finished our drinks and ate most of the cheese before heading home, where I called Uncle Teddy. "You may consider me paranoid. Why do I get such a bad mood from a conversation between two colleagues during a lull in the workday. This has to do with how my first marriage ended to Paul's biological mother. Her name was Claire, which may still be the case if she's still alive. We haven't spoken in 15 years, not since she showed up taller than the kite at Paul's graduation party. I married Claire right after college. She worked as a bartender in the tavern where our group hung out. She was the most beautiful and well-built woman I have ever met. I started dating her as soon as she showed interest in me. I'm not bad-looking, but I'm sure her attraction to me had more to do with the fact that I was a graduate student in college, and she probably heard about my trust fund through the grapevine. I always had a wad of cash with me and always tipped bartenders, especially nice bartenders, above the standard rate. Claire accepted the date, rocked my world on our first night together, and accepted my proposal for the rest of the semester. My parents tried to dissuade me from marrying her, but, of course, I was much smarter than them. I think it was Mark Twain who said that he was surprised how much his own father learned in the 7 years between Twain's 18th and 25th birthdays, or something like that. Whoever said this and whatever he said, it also applied to me in those years of my life. Luckily, my grandfather was very specific when he set up trust funds for me and my brother. These included not having access to funds until our 30th birthday and requiring a prenuptial agreement before marriage. Even without $500,000 in the trust fund, I was still very wealthy. As long as I kept my grades up, my parents gave me excellent support. And thanks to my parents' connections, I had a fantastic job waiting for me after graduating from university with an MBA. I graduated, Claire signed a prenuptial agreement, and we got married in Vegas, over my parents' mild objections. I won't say the whole marriage was terrible. In fact, without going into detail in front of Jane, if she reads this, I'd say the sex was great. Although Claire and I had sex since our first date, she went all out that week in Vegas. Claire spent every day on the top pool, wearing the smallest bikini she could find. In fact, she once became friends with a young flight attendant who lent her a beautiful bikini purchased in the Caribbean. I was sitting on my lounge chair by the pool when they came down from Beth's flight attendant room. Claire took off her covers and I almost choked on my beer. No one complained, but Claire and Beth spent that day and the next laughing behind their Foster Grant glasses at every man who found an excuse to walk by. Claire was no less beautiful at night. One day she came out of the bedroom wearing a red silk dress that was almost obscene, accessorized with a pair of red high heels so that she looked straight into my eyes. "Where are we going when you're dressed like that?" I asked. "You'll see," was all she answered. As we walked through the lobby, I was interested in watching the heads of the men and some of the women turn as Claire walked by. We got into a taxi. Claire gave the taxi driver a note, and we headed off into the Vegas night. We stopped in front of the club. Claire got out of the taxi while I paid the taxi driver. He laughed, thanked me for the good tip, and told me to have fun. Before that night, I had only been to a couple of these clubs in the Midwest. The girls were usually somewhere between 5 and 8 in appearance. Very few of them danced with any real enthusiasm. Vegas was different. Where did all these beautiful women come from? Of course, I know that some, maybe most of them, had plastic surgery, but if so, then the surgery was of the highest quality. Claire gave me a big smile as I looked up at the stage and saw two beauties, completely naked, each twirling around her pole. "Like?" she asked. Claire lifted the hem of her dress, revealing the garter belt around her upper thigh. From under it, she pulled out a couple of $100. "Today I'm giving you a treat." And she really treated me. I got 3 dances that night, using all my will not to grab each dancer's breast or butt. 2 muscular bouncers who looked like they belonged on the Bears' defensive line were a strong deterrent. Afterwards, we headed back to the hotel. I wanted to go up to our room immediately, but Claire wanted another drink. We sat in the lounge and Claire continued her flirtations. "What did you like best tonight?" she whispered in my ear. "You mean, besides my beautiful wife in the boldest dress I've ever seen? Or 2 naked women twirling around those poles with the grace of ballerinas?" "Damn, Claire, how long are you going to make fun of me down here? Aren't we rushing to the room after all this flirting?" "Who said I didn't have sex?" Claire said this while looking me straight in the eyes and playing with my thigh. Remember when I went to the bathroom while you were getting your third dance? Weren't you wondering why I was gone for so long? Or were you so into that brunette that you didn't even miss me? What do you mean? I mean, my husband was having so much fun with that stupid brunette chick that he didn't even notice his wife left long enough to have sex in the men's room with that handsome black gentleman who was sitting at the next table. I struggled with Claire's confession. Did she continue to abuse me? Or did she really just cheat on me and abuse me in the first 4 days of our marriage? Oh, poor Mark. Your face tells me you want it to be a lie, but your reaction below tells me you like the idea. Like, really? I answered Claire honestly. If you ever cheat on me, I'll divorce you so fast your head will spin. Let's go upstairs. We'll give it a test, and if you fail, this marriage will be over before it even begins. We can get a divorce. Vegas is almost as easy as getting married. Claire looked torn but didn't argue as I took her hand and practically dragged her towards the elevator and then down the hallway to our room. We lay in each other's arms. It was a great night, but I felt like I had to say one more thing before we went to sleep. I'll accept the flirting, but remember what I said. If I ever catch you cheating, it'll be over between us. I know it's not the most romantic thing a husband can say to his wife after making love, but Claire needed to know how I felt about cheating. It was most likely that night, or one of the mornings, afternoons, or evenings of our week in Vegas that we conceived Paul, because 6 weeks later, Claire held the pregnancy test strip in her hands, which showed a positive result. I was delighted at the thought of a baby, and Claire seemed happy too. At least she never said anything negative. We were financially secure with my income, so we agreed that Claire could become a housewife. Claire's pregnancy was uneventful. Paul was born in December, and yes, he was definitely my son. Claire wasn't a great mom, but she was a good mom to Paul. One of our big debates during the last trimester of Claire's pregnancy was about breastfeeding. Claire absolutely refused to even consider the possibility, and after all, you can't force a woman to breastfeed her baby. After Paul's second birthday, Claire wanted to go back to work. Her only qualification was as a barmaid. As a compromise, I insisted that she not work in cheap bars or dating places. She had to find a job in a decent restaurant. Otherwise, it was unacceptable. Claire agreed to my demands and within 3 months was hired by one of the city's top supper clubs. My mom and Claire's mom watched Paul during the few hours our work schedules overlapped. I thought we had a good marriage. I really loved Claire and thought she felt the same. Once Claire started working, there were no obvious signs of problems. We spent less time together, but I thought it was temporary until Claire got pregnant again. Unfortunately, there was a snake in the grass, and his name was Neil. Claire and Neil worked together in a restaurant. I met him a couple of times while sitting at the bar, which I did from time to spend a few extra hours with my wife. I had never seen anything between them that would raise a red flag, so that fateful day when I entered our house came as a complete surprise to me. The house was spotlessly clean, and the aroma of my favorite dish filled the kitchen. I kissed Claire and high-fived Paul. "What have I done to deserve this?" I asked. Claire's response was like a blow to the chest. "Mark, there's no easy way to say this, but I'm leaving with Neil tonight. We're going to California. Neil has a role in a TV series, and he wants me there with him." I can't say for sure, but I think I just sat there for a few minutes looking from Claire to Paul. Finally, I came out of my stupor. "You won't take Paul away? God won't allow it. Paul stays with you. He'll be better off here with you and our parents. There's no way I can take care of him while working there, and Neil has no interest in being a parent." I lost control and started screaming. "You're a fucking bitch! How can you do this to us? How can you walk away from me and your son? What the hell did I do to deserve this?" "You didn't do anything, Mark. But I knew from the first time I had sex with Neil that it was over between us. You always said you'd divorce me if I ever cheated on you." At that moment, I realized that our almost 3-year-old son was being subjected to the most filthy language from the mouths of his parents. Paul sat at the table looking scared. I took him, sat him in front of the TV, turned on a Disney cartoon with loud volume, kissed his head, and returned to the kitchen. Claire didn't move. "What's so special about this guy that you have to leave your family?" Don't go into that territory, Mark. You don't want to know. I restrained myself enough not to scream. No, I want to know. You never expressed dissatisfaction with our sexual relationship. You never complained. What is his secret trick to steal wives from their husbands? Mark, this will get you nowhere. I withdrew half the money from our accounts, and I have 2 bags in my car. I won't need winter clothes in Los Angeles, so just donate them to charity or something. I'll let you know where I'll land in Los Angeles, but you still have my cell phone number in case of an emergency. I was still in shock and didn't have time to grab the stone from her left hand before she entered the TV room. She hugged and kissed Paul and immediately walked out the door. The next day, I woke up my foggy brain and began to disconnect from our life, canceling credit cards, closing joint accounts, and contacting an attorney to begin divorce proceedings. Claire was in Los Angeles with Neil. A few months later, my recovery slowed down a bit when I saw this asshole while channel surfing one night. I was wondering how Claire dealt with the fact that Neil's character was in bed with some beautiful actress, and they were simulating sex. I didn't deal with it well at all. Then I realized that Neil was in bed with some blonde actress who might be Claire's twin. Talk about bad timing. I turned off the TV, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and sent my thoughts of bad karma west to Los Angeles. I also enrolled Paul in daycare, which he could attend during my working hours. Claire's mom offered to watch Paul for free, but it made me so angry that I angrily refused. I allowed her parents to take Paul on day trips on the weekends, but I never let him stay overnight. Call me petty, but they raised Claire, and I somehow came to terms with my actions based on Claire's betrayal. My mom and dad didn't come straight out and say, "I told you so," but they took a perverse pleasure in what happened next. It seems that the father, in order to protect his grandson, has taken it upon himself to hire a private detective in Los Angeles to keep an eye on Claire and Neil. It was then that we learned that they regularly use illegal substances. He also documented their parties. A private detective made sure the couple was arrested. It was only a misdemeanor, but the conviction and sex party photos would be enough to paint Claire as an unfit mother if she ever changed her mind and tried to win Paul back. It was at Paul's kindergarten that I met my second wife, Jane. Jane worked as a school teacher and took a special interest in Paul. As might be expected, Paul had difficulty adjusting to the divorce and near total separation from his mother. Jane's patience and guidance helped Paul overcome his emotional reaction to her rejection. I gradually got to know Jane through our weekly half-hour conference to discuss Paul's progress. Naturally, as the weeks passed, Jane and I started talking about ourselves. Jane began asking me questions to gauge how I responded to Paul's problems. One afternoon, I turned the tables and simply asked, "What about you, Miss Summers? What motivates you?" Jane scolded me briefly. As a teenager, she developed a tumor that required surgery and left her unable to have a child. After graduating from high school, she seriously considered becoming a nun and was actually a novice for 6 months before returning home to attend college with the goal of becoming an elementary school teacher. Halfway through her first grade, she changed her mind about focusing her studies on preschool and has worked at the school for the past 6 years. I decided to go all in. What about social life? Are there any serious guys? Jane looked at me and didn't answer, as if she was wondering how to react to my intrusion into her privacy. Oh, I thought to myself. Here she tells me that she prefers women or just doesn't like men. But instead, Jane smiled. I dated, but I never had a long-term serious relationship. There was one boy in college, but he really wanted to have kids, and that became the elephant in the room. I was inspired. Could you let me take you to dinner sometime? It would be nice to get to know you better and thank you for all you have done for Paul. Seeing Paul smile and laugh is all I need. But if you want to have dinner together, then the answer is yes. A beautiful friendship began that Friday over dinner that blossomed into a beautiful romance. Paul loved Jane. My parents loved Jane. I loved Jane. But most of all, Jane loved Paul and me. We got married within a year. Over the next few years, we heard less and less about Claire, and finally I asked Claire if Jane could adopt Paul. I flew to Los Angeles with the documents to discuss this in person. It was the first time we'd really talked since the night she left, and I took the opportunity to get some answers. Tell me why, Claire. I can't believe you left that night. I'm sorry I hurt you so much. We got married too young, Mark. Or at least I was too young. You know, I was wild when we met. I thought our love would change me, but it didn't. And then I had a baby, although I'm still struggling with the whole forever thing. It was too much. I thought work would help, to get away and be with adults. But Neil showed up and I screwed up by letting him put stars in my eyes. I didn't say a word while Claire spoke, but she saw the pain in my eyes. You really shouldn't be sad, Mark. You and Paul will be better off without me, and much better off with Jane in your life. Claire and I talked for another half hour. She signed the release to adopt Paul and I kissed her goodbye. I still cannot understand how a mother can let her child go. I think illegal substances had a lot to do with her downfall. However, we were all shocked by the level of her background when Claire showed up at Paul's graduation party. Neil was long gone by then. Claire was accompanied by a guy who made Iggy Pop look good. Claire was a skeleton of her former self. I felt sorry for Paul, and especially for Claire's parents. How very sad to see your daughter die. Once again, it was Jane's love and attention that helped Paul survive this nightmare. I must admit, there have been times when I have asked God why he would not allow a woman like Janie to have children of her own. Whether God answered me or not, I realized that Jane not only raised Paul to be the wonderful young man he is today, but that hundreds of children benefited from Mrs. Davis's preschool classes. Uncle Teddy wasted no time. Early Thursday morning, a week after my Saturday evening call, Teddy knocked on our front door. He sat down opposite Jane and me. I handed him the beer and held my breath. Teddy began. Well, first I'll give you the good news. Taylor didn't do anything to Carlo Barzino. I let the air out of my chest. Jane squeezed my hand at the same time. I think it's time to get involved. There was a little flirting between them, and Carlo is a professional seducer. We couldn't legally wiretap Taylor's phone, but based on Carlo's contacts with some shady people already under surveillance, my friends in the police obtained a court order to wiretap Carlo. He called her a couple of times this week. He pretends to ask her advice regarding the girl. Taylor was friendly on the phone, and she tried to give him advice on how to fix his relationship, which, by the way, doesn't exist. But Taylor didn't take any of his offers to meet outside of work. Here's the bad news. The Russian mafia tried to get something from Paul but couldn't find any dirty laundry on him, so they tried another angle. Apparently, the Russians learned the story of Paul's mother, Claire. They are using Carlo, who has a very nasty reputation as a top-notch gigolo, to get something from Taylor. They then either blackmail Paul or believe it will put Paul in a bad situation when he finds out about his wife. You've got to be kidding me. Do they think this will work? Well, my sources say there is an Interpol report that tells how it worked once. There was a prosecutor in Europe who became furious when he was shown photographs of his wife being photographed with several men at the same time. The man went crazy and went to a local Russian social club with a gun. He fired a couple of shots before being subdued. A couple of people were injured. No one died. The investigation was suspended and the whole case was hushed up. I know it sounds too weird to be true. In any case, my friends from the police told me this story. The Russians seem to think they can repeat their play here. Okay, if this is what's going on, what should we do? First, call Taylor and tell her what's going on with Carlo. Secondly, get rid of Carlo because he's probably getting desperate at this point with Paul coming home next week. He still hasn't committed any crime, so the police can't intervene. And as a retired police officer, I cannot be involved in his disappearance, otherwise I will lose my pension, or maybe worse. Jane, call your mother's brother Vin. This is his department. Teddy suggested that Jane's uncle Vincent should take care of Carlo, which got me thinking. Uncle Ted, what if Carlo is related to the Sicilians? Are Sicilians and Russians working together? That won't happen, Mark. These guys hate each other. Carlo is strictly a freelance gigolo. When the Russians hired him, he should have known he was playing with fire. If Vin makes him disappear, everyone will feel better. Ted finished his beer, stood up to kiss his niece on the cheek, and walked out the door saying, "Good luck, let me know when it's over." It's time to act quickly. It was Thursday. Paul was due home the following Tuesday or Wednesday, so it seemed logical that Carlo would have to play that weekend before Paul returned home. I called Vincent and asked if we could stop right away. Jane called Taylor and asked her to come over tonight. Neither Jane nor I had ever asked Uncle Vin for a favor before. I knew he loved his niece, but we never became close. Did he like my son, who wasn't actually a blood relative, enough to help with this problem? What about the Russians? Will Vincent's involvement lead to a gang war? The wedding day scene from The Godfather and these questions were running through my head as we sat in his office and told him what we had learned from Ted. Okay, tell Taylor to accept Carlo's offer to meet. I think he'll try to have a Saturday night after work. He'll pour her a couple drinks, add a little more alcohol to her drink, and then take advantage. I know this, Carlo. He came to us looking for a job, and we turned him down because of his reputation. It doesn't surprise me that the Russian mafia picked him up. In several cases, there is no respect for respectable women. I had to ask, will this cause problems between you and the Russians? No, that's why they use an outsider. They think we're too stupid to connect the dots between them, Carlo and my great-nephew. When Vincent said, great-nephew, my eyes opened wide, and he caught the expression on my face. Mark, I know we haven't discussed this. You married my niece, the sweetest girl I know. If I were lucky enough to have a daughter, I would pray that she would grow up to be as beautiful inside and out as Jane. I looked at Jane, and she blushed. Vincent continued. And I would pray that she is lucky enough to find the love that Jane found with you and your son. I pay attention to these things. I know you two have something that few couples have, and I thank you for sharing that with my niece. Go home, talk to Taylor and tell her to meet that clown after work on Saturday night. Nothing will happen to Taylor, I guarantee it. With that, Uncle Vincent stood up, shook my hand, and kissed the top of Jane's head, hugging her. There was no doubt that both uncles loved her as their daughter. No matter how difficult it may be to approach Uncle Vincent with our request for help, the hardest part is yet to come. Taylor was supposed to come over this evening. She seemed more relaxed than last Saturday when we opened the door. She kissed us both and sat down to eat dinner. I hope this was a good sign. Jane took the lead. Taylor, I don't know how to put it better, but Mark and I were concerned about what we saw on Saturday. Is there something between you and this Carlo guy? Taylor reacted sharply to Jane's question. Mom, how can you think like that? Please, Taylor, I never insult your intelligence. Don't insult mine. It was obvious that you two were sharing a moment, even without any obvious physical displays of affection, when Mark and I walked into the restaurant, and you were too confused. When you realized it was us, to claim complete innocence. And even if you don't think you were in an emotional relationship, it was obvious that Carlo thought differently. Taylor burst into tears when Jane finished. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, Dad. I swear nothing happened except flirting. I was ashamed of what you saw on Saturday. I would never do anything to hurt Paul. Carlo tried to talk me down to meet him, and I constantly refused. I admit that during work hours I allowed him to flirt with me more than he should have. He has a knack for making it seem innocent. But please believe me when I say that this was never physical, and I never encouraged him to think that we could be anything more than friendly colleagues. Now it was my turn. Considering how upset Taylor was now, I needed to be careful with the next phase of this intervention. Okay, hold on, young lady, because you haven't heard everything yet. I told Taylor about the Russians, Carlo's real profession as a gigolo, the incident in Europe, and how she fits into this conspiracy. If I hadn't spoken directly to Jane's uncle, it would have been hard for me to believe it. So I wasn't surprised when Taylor asked if we were making this whole thing up to scare her to death. Jane, call Uncle Ted. Let Taylor hear it from him himself. With Uncle Ted on the phone, we watched Taylor become more and more upset as Ted confirmed what we had told her. When she hung up, I handed her a glass of cognac. Taylor took a long sip from her glass and looked a little better. What should I do now? Should I quit? I told her, no, but what we're going to ask you to do could be very difficult. First of all, and forgive me for asking this, do you swear There was nothing between you and Carlo? I'm very sorry, but it all depends on your answer. Taylor tearfully replied, Please believe me, Dad. From the day your son and I pledged our love to each other and became a couple, no one else has existed for me. If I were that woman, I would never have married Paul. I know how much he suffered when his biological mother left you two, and I couldn't claim to love a man and do that to him. I want what you two want, and my parents are lifelong partners with my significant other, and for me that's Paul. Taylor, this means so much to me. With that in mind, if you agree, here's what we want you to do. We've hired a couple of private investigators to keep an eye on you for the next few days. We expect Carlo to ask you to meet him over the weekend, most likely after work on a Saturday evening. Accept his invitation. At this, Taylor started shaking her head in denial and looked at me as if I was crazy. You'll be fine, Taylor. Make sure it's a very public place to meet. No apartments or other private places. The detectives will be there. Even before you take your first sip, the detectives will be involved. I didn't tell Taylor that the detectives were actually connected to Uncle Vincent. If she guessed, she was wise enough to keep it to herself. When the detectives get involved, one of them will put you in a taxi, and you will be brought straight here. I also didn't tell Taylor that the taxi driver wasn't actually a taxi driver. It was another one of Vincent's employees. We didn't take any risks. As expected, Carlo called Taylor on Friday and asked if she wanted to meet him after work on Saturday. He tried hard to persuade her, claiming that he needed her feminine look after his girlfriend dumped him. He played on feelings, claiming that he was heartbroken and could not share his sadness with anyone other than Taylor, since he respects and appreciates her. Being Italian, he said he needed to know why American women didn't find him worthy or attractive. Taylor did her best to sound sympathetic and agreed to have drinks with him on Saturday after work. Taylor showed up to work late on Saturday, having missed the first half of her shift. She told us that she couldn't muster the strength to work side by side with Carlo for a full 10 hours. At 11 o'clock in the evening, Taylor's taxi pulled up to our house. She came in, sat down on the sofa, and began to cry, hugging Jane. With luck, this ordeal is over. On Sunday afternoon, we went to Jane's parents for dinner. I wasn't surprised when Uncle Vin showed up. I smelled lasagna and garlic bread in the oven and saw 2 bottles of Sicilian red on the table. After dinner, he invited Jane and me to the back porch. As Uncle Vin enjoyed his cigar and we all shared the afternoon strega, he told us that everything was settled. It appears that 2 associate members convinced Carlo to leave the bar after Taylor left. I'm guessing the guns and threats were part of the persuasion, since none of the other bar patrons were paying attention. Carlo was taken to a storage room and sang like a canary while being recorded on video. Carlo laid out everything, including where he was going to take Taylor. The other 2 associates went to the hotel room, where they found the 3 villains waiting for Carlo and Taylor. The room had 2 cameras set up on tripods, ready to film the event. Taylor was a very lucky girl that night. Taylor stayed with us until Wednesday when Paul returned home. It was an emotional night. Paul was told everything except Uncle Vincent's involvement in Carlo's disappearance. Paul is a member of the judicial system, and some things cannot be disclosed. We stated that Carlo likely left town to avoid facing the wrath of the Russians over his failure to seduce Taylor. We knew Paul was smarter than to believe it, but he was also smart enough to know when not to ask questions. Taylor held her breath as she told Paul about the flirting that happened between her and Carlo. How innocent it was. The moment was greatly lightened when Paul said that if every couple got divorced because of some workplace flirtation, few marriages would survive. In fact, he admitted that he sometimes flirted with Sandra Miller, one of the lawyers in the office. Everyone burst into laughter when Taylor responded to his confession, "Tell that bitch to stay away from my husband." Taylor immediately blushed as she realized what she had said. Paul informed his boss about the plot, and let's just say it didn't help the Russians' cause at all. It appears the Russians were also trying to trap a female lawyer working on a case in Paul's office. She put 2 and 2 together when she learned about Carlo and Taylor. A young man she had recently started dating was trying to get her involved in a local club. It was too much of a coincidence, and she immediately left him. The full might of federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies was unleashed on the Russians. All of Paul's colleagues were very negative about what the Russians were planning with two of their own. And if that weren't enough, it seems a certain Sicilian we know sent a message that if his nephew or his nephew's wife were harmed, all arrangements would be void. At our 25th anniversary, I saw Teddy and Vincent talking in the corner. I didn't bother them, but I would be interested in hearing this conversation. Taylor soon quit her job. She spent time preparing the nursery and volunteering at the daycare. We were surprised to learn that she was pregnant with twins. The twins were born last month, and yes, they are definitely my son's babies. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.